Welcome to Classes in Session, presented by UI Health. I'm Doug Glanville. Today we discuss loyalty, the NCAA, and the limbo state of the college athlete. Helping us out along the way will be sports marketing pioneer Sonny Vaccaro and a pair of professors from Arizona State's Global Sport Institute, Ken Shropshire and Victoria Jackson. Those interviews are coming up. Author Megan Whalen Turner once said, "It isn't an easy thing to give your loyalty to someone you don't know, especially when that person chooses to reveal nothing of himself." The NCAA has often revealed very little about itself to the athletes that play under its banner. In college sports, loyalty is a virtue, the sense that team colors are a bloodline. Yet more and more we are questioning when that bloodline started and who are the true beneficiaries of its legacy. Debate over free labor, the mythology of the term student athlete, the sponsorships and control of one's likeness, all bring it into focus. Yet loyalty from these athletes is expected as a duty to the whole, not just to their craft or the sport, but to the institutions that provide the forum. But change is bubbling around all of us in this precarious economic engine. Athletes are regaining back their likenesses, high school leagues are forming, and social justice is revisiting an exclusionary history that calls on tradition, even when that tradition was often designed to celebrate the power of privilege. Chicago Cubs manager Jim Riggleman, my first major league manager, once said in a meeting, "Play for the name on the front, not the name on the back." It spoke of loyalty and our place on a team that has a goal larger than self. In colleges across the country, whether there's a name on the back or not, athletes play under the banner of their college colors. It is couched as a pure form of amateur competition. Unpaid student athletes on the court for love and loyalty. But let's remember how the term student athlete came about. In the 1950s, colleges became concerned after the serious injuries and even deaths of college football players. These athletes sought reimbursement for medical expenses, and their families sought compensation for the devastating loss of a family member. The financial risk in providing such protections became an existential crisis for the college athletic system. In a creative maneuver, the student athlete was born, not under the rosy auspices as we know it today, but as a labor class, to make sure the university was not liable for the health of these players beyond keeping them healthy enough to perform. In time, college athletics boomed with the dawn of a media awakening. President John F. Kennedy signed the Sports Broadcasting Act of 1961, forcing the NCAA to create an economic model without the antitrust exemptions or exceptions received by professional sports. This highlighted the age-old challenge for college sports in its dance between amateurism and maximizing the economics of competitive business. In response to their thinning power to push against antitrust laws, the NCAA heavily invested in what has become the most iconic tournament in college sports, March Madness, which of course today is a near $1 billion a year juggernaut. COVID-19 canceled this cash cow last season, underscoring the financial significance of this tournament to not only the viability of the NCAA, but of the colleges whose funding depends on these events. The athletes are cogs in this wheel of fortune and periodically have pushed back for economic freedom and other benefits for their services. But beyond money, the courts have had to stare down the sovereignty of the NCAA since its inception, chipping away at its golden armor. Cases like the NCAA versus Jerry Tarkanian, which established due process for NCAA rule breakers, or Ed O'Bannon's lawsuit over an athlete's name, image, and likeness, which helped bring legislation to multiple state houses throughout the country. Yet all of this came under fire by the threat of our lifetimes, COVID-19, and some players and coaches have opted out. This sometimes came with bitter criticism of their loyalty to their team and to their university. So what would you do to face a silent danger? Play for the name on the front and risk the name on the back? Let's welcome in Sonny Vaccaro, who's known for being an architect of the world of sneaker sponsorship and endorsement. Has had tremendous amount of work in getting the showcase for high school basketball players to get the opportunity to match with different colleges, worked inside as a self-made Nike, Adidas, Reebok executive, amongst others. So we're welcoming in Sonny and really appreciate you taking our time today.
So happy I can reunite with you and talk to the people out there about anything that may be of interest to them that I have an answer for, you'll get, Doug.
Well, Sonny, we're really exploring the connection in college athletics to the loyalty of the athlete. And you were front and center in this world with college sports basketball endorsements and what the industry has become. So just as a basic level, what is loyalty to you in college athletics? What does it mean?
Loyalty to me in college athletics, bring a builder. I think it's a one-way street. I think the loyalty comes from the athlete for the love of the game and the sport that he plays, or she. That's loyalty, because basically the boys and girls who have played athletics all their life started this a long time before we had professionalism, and a long time before we had amateurism, so-called. We had a love of a sport. And that's the loyalty, is to the game. My loyalty was to the individuals who played the game, whatever the game was, Doug. So I don't think it has that kind of a connection anymore. I think loyalty and sports are not synonymous with each other anymore. They're two opposite poles, because what I've watched is a gradual greed factor enter into the purity of a particular game.
Well, let's look at the money equation. Specifically, you were on that inside, right? You connected the dots to coaches, to sponsorships, to be able to really create the financial system, which we see today. What did the money do to that loyalty equation?
You know what, Doug, and that's the best question anyone should ask me, is because I did offer the first amount of money to the amateur college coaches and the supposedly amateur schools that endorsed these coaches or hired them, by offering them money to wear our shoe. They would let me pay the coaches. They being the NCAA, they being the presidents of the universities, they allowed me to do this. We gave the school free shoes, in turn gave the athletes shoes to wear for nothing, so they didn't have to buy them, which in some cases in the 70s, kids playing on the team had to get their own. So I started the money rolling. What you saw was a gradual thing. And I want to tell your audience now that when I gave them the check, they took the check and no one said anything. They could have stopped Sonny Vaccaro and Nike right there. They didn't. Just so we understand. So all the stories and all the ones that are on this side or that side, or I'm Darth Vader, or I'm the savior, or I'm the destroyer, whatever that is, whether Nike is. I want your public to understand that the NCAA and the colleges and the presidents, everybody inside that astute group there, august group, they let me pay them.
We'll be right back on Classes in Session with Doug Glanville, presented by UI Health. More with Sonny Vaccaro coming up, including why he thinks NIL could be the last will and testament of the modern American athlete. Welcome back to Classes in Session with Doug Glanville, presented by UI Health. Here's more of our conversation with Sonny Vaccaro. How do you give that voice to these athletes? We're seeing some movement slowly, but what's missing to be able to take that step where they do have a say and are able to leverage their influence to be able to make that change?
The problem I'm saying today is there is no option. And my thing I couldn't understand in the sport that I'm identified with was the logic behind Europeans come to America without the benefit of an age limit or anything like that, and go play for make money, not staying in Europe, mate. The kids were coming here when Brandon Jennings couldn't sign an NBA contract and he had to go to Italy. And Daniele Gallinari, I believe, came to America at the same age and played in the NBA. For all common sense and decency, there's something wrong with the American kid having to go to Italy to earn money. And they chastised them. They made fun of them. They did all these things until the injury. Brandon had a great 9-year career in the NBA. My point isn't whether he was good enough or not. My point was and is they refused to allow you to earn money. And Zion Williamson, thank God, because he obviously has the opportunity to be one of the greatest players ever to play. And he seems to be a wonderful kid. And all these, he would have been denied, Doug.
we're starting to see this effort towards name, image, and likeness, the famous NIL. And this has gained some traction. You were very close to this process because Ed O'Bannon, someone you knew well, was the centerpiece of the case against the NCAA. So what do you see as the opportunity with NIL going forward?
You know, it's a very simple equation. Your parents gave you your name, and God gave you life. I have no idea how the NCAA can claim on a falsified piece of paper, put in a scholarship thing where a kid basically had no idea what the hell he was signing, signed over his rights to his name, image, and likeness into perpetuity. How in God's name does somebody own our identity forever? It's the greed. And I can't understand the bias and the resentment of athletes through a certain segment of American life, and others, Doug, have the right to be whatever the hell they want to do. But name, image, and likeness, I think this is the last will and testament of the American athlete. I really believe this is true. This is what I'm saying at 81 years old. If you ask me to end this show with something, if it isn't changed now, you won't hear of name, image, and likeness. You won't hear of freedom of right. The athlete has rights, and I think they're going to win.
So, Sonny, in the big picture, you have been on the inside from so many different perspectives on how the economic engine of college athletics, the NCAA, really operates. And we've talked about how this huge challenge of finding this relationship that used to exist where the loyalty was to the sport. Now, given all the money and all that what we know, how do you get back to that? And can you? And if not, what's next?
Well, next is doomsday. I mean, eventually what will happen, they'll kill themselves. Greed does that. That's what happens, at least my interpretation. I have no knowledge of anything other than my mind. So greed will kill it because the kids won't play, the public won't accept. That's what happens. A lot of great things, ended without a war, okay? So what happens next is a logical explanation, but from an illogical person, me, to an audience that may not understand what I'm going to say. All they have to do is come to grips with equality for the athlete. Allow the athlete to be a part of everything, all the pomp and circumstances, but also the financial end of it.
Beautifully said, Sonny Vaccaro. I really appreciate your time coming out and sharing your insight. This is Classes in Session, so we're here to learn. You're the guest lecturer of the day. And I want to thank you for sharing those insights because we know you were on the inside and you saw this from soup to nuts. And every one of us now is a little bit wiser or more wise as a result of your insights. So thank you for your time and good luck in the future. We'll be in touch.
Thank you for having me on. It was a pleasure getting your call, and hopefully we get to hug each other again, Doug. That'd be nice.
We'll be right back on Classes in Session with Doug Glanville, presented by UI Health. We talk loyalty with a pair of professors from Arizona State's Global Sport Institute after the break. The explosion in college athletic revenues has led to one of our guests to call the system Jim Crow. Find out why after this. Welcome back to Classes in Session with Doug Glanville, presented by UI Health. Let's welcome in Dr. Victoria Jackson, a clinical assistant professor of history at Arizona State University, also a legend in NCAA championship in track and field at Arizona State also, and a compelling and prolific writer on the intersection of history, sport, and society. We also have Ken Shropshire, professor distinguished, also the CEO of the Global Sport Institute at Arizona State University, author of The Miseducation of the Student Athlete, How to Fix College Sports, and full disclosure, was at the University of Pennsylvania, my alma mater. So welcome in. And as we've discussed before, I'm very interested in looking at the story of the student athlete as it pertains to loyalty to these institutions in which they play. So I want to start with you, Dr. Jackson. How about looking into the value of the student athlete to college athletics as we know it?
The role of the athlete in the history of higher education, I think, is incredibly important. It depends on what sport that athlete is playing. Football, I mean, the history of college sports is really a history of American football since this game is born on university campuses. And we see some schools like the University of Chicago using football to sell the college to attract prospective students. So thinking historically, one of the through lines in the history of higher education in the United States is the value that athletes bring to campus communities.
What about loyalty in this equation? How does that connect the dots to the viability of sport and these institutions?
Well, if you did not instill the, in some sense, the fiction of loyalty, you'd have a hard time keeping athletes attached to these universities. You'd have a hard time with the whole system of boosters that exists. The idea that you have people that throughout their lives, even if they move away from the physical location of alma mater, they stay connected to the institution. And it all fits around. I mean, as you were asking the question, I was thinking about the original. There was an original Carnegie Commission report, 1929 or so, I believe, that asked the question that just dominates this whole space. It's, what does sport have to do with these universities? Nowhere else in the world do they fit together in this same way. And you're asking a great question, because I've never really approached it from that way, to think about this. The importance of loyalty is kind of the glue to keep this whole system in place.
And it brings me to think about an article, I think we've all shared this article, Taylor Branch wrote in 2011 called The Shame of College Sports. And he discusses the history, but one point that stuck with me is he was trying to make a parallel of the system, and he mentioned colonization. So what say you both? Let me start with you, Professor Shropshire, about describing the system, which it is in sort of in an analogy form.
Again, that thread of loyalty and the intensity with which there is an affection for the institution ties in with this colonization too. I mean, when I went to Stanford in the early 70s, the year I went there, the name was being changed from the Indians to nothing. And here I am as an 18-year-old, upset by this. that how would they change this wonderful name? And being infused by the alums and others and teammates saying they took away our name, it kind of became something to charge us forward. And I can look back at that and say, why in the world would I think such a thing? Especially now that I'm in Arizona, I have a much deeper understanding of the whole concept of native mascots and how negative it is. But my intensity in the loyalty that was instantly developed was because of this institution, because this is the place that's, in my mind in that moment, is providing me with this free education. I've got to fully attach myself to this place. This is a wonderful opportunity. So to be colonized and to not understand that there is another way, to not understand that to act the way the British tell you to act is the best path. So the Texas story, I mean, what's empowering about it is the deeper education that these athletes have given themselves, have taken the chance to adopt, as opposed to in my era was, okay, how do I embrace this institution in the deepest kind of way? So that's the conflict that exists. I mean, I'm excited when I see young athletes understand what's going on, and I am depressed when I see them just going along with the system and accepting it and being loyal in the way that you're describing.
Yeah, and Dr. Jackson, I mean, certainly add to the colonization, but one point I wanted to ask you about was your distinction. You often talk about revenue versus non-revenue. So this sort of system is not sort of equally dispersed and spread like the jelly on the toast, so to speak. So help us understand about this revenue, non-revenue dynamic.
Yeah, I think this has intensified over the last 20 years because the money has grown so much. So we've seen an acceleration of the big time over the last 20 years, from about a $4 billion a year industry to a $14 billion a year industry. And so maybe if we went back in time to, the late 90s, maybe even the early 2000s, we could see something where, you know, the pressures to balance academic and athletic roles and responsibilities for all athletes are more in line with each other, knowing that for football and basketball players, it's still a much harder burden to bear and balancing act. So I call the system Jim Crow more so than, you know, a plantation or slavery or colonization, because, you know, first of all, athletes are opting in, they're not forced. But also the athletes in those revenue generating sports, especially if we're looking at the Power 5 schools, which is where my work focuses, you know, those rosters are majority Black, and the stars especially are.
Well, Dr. Jackson, Professor Shropshire, I really appreciate your tremendous insight as we try to understand the relationship between student athletes and the institutions where they play, and the NCAA as in the leadership chair to try to make these changes to make it more balanced, more fair, more just, and more sustainable in a way that's fair to all. So thank you for your insights, and look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Loyalty in college sports has proven to be an evolving virtue. We want to believe in its permanence, or else what remains would contradict its very definition. The spirit of team demands us to find an unwavering commitment to something bigger than self. Yet as we have learned about college athletics, the economics of sport has turned loyalty into a transaction. The system depends on the blind faith of student athletes or the use of power to ensure its existence. Yet challenges are being raised to level the playing field and take on this power and its pocketbook. Name, image, and likeness, an elite high school hoops league, even pushback on a long-standing University of Texas song are showing that these athletes are expecting more in return for what is free labor for the boundless enrichment of everything around them. Loyalty, it seems, is becoming more of a two-way street, but the question remains, will the system once again lead these athletes to a dead end? I'm Doug Glanville. We'll see you next time.